When it comes to restoring enthusiasm in American history for kids and adults, our next guest is helping to lead the way. David Bruce Smith is the founder of the Grateful American Foundation, and he is here to explain how his organization is making learning fun, and especially when it comes to history. He is joined by one of his advisors, historian and Civil War scholar Adam Goodheart of the Washington College's CV Starr Center. Thank you so much for joining me, gentlemen.
Thank you.
I'm excited to talk about this because we're sort of right in that perfect time, especially to talk about Lincoln. And Adam, I'm going to start with you. You've got this great book, 1861, that really talks about this really formative part of our history. Tell me more about your book.
Sure. Well, the book was inspired when my students at Washington College and I found this incredible trove of family papers in the attic of an old house out on the Eastern Shore.
Wow.
Yeah, it was amazing. And it was the kind of documents that really just brought you into that moment as people are trying to figure out what this Civil War meant for them individually, what was going to happen to the country, what was going to happen to their families. And Lincoln, really, we forget, was one of those people who we think of him as a sort of a statesman looming over it all, but he was actually as confused at times, as perplexed, as challenged as any American was.
That's fascinating. And your book goes so much more in depth into all of that. Now, David, I want to talk to you about the Grateful American Foundation. This is a love of history that you have and you're bringing to so many other people. Lincoln is not considered a founding father, but he is so important to our history, and you think that the Emancipation Proclamation is the defining moment in his presidency. Tell me more about that.
Well, he is a receptacle of the founding father ideas, and the Emancipation Proclamation, to me, is the formal beginning of civil rights, because it is a document that it's almost like the second Declaration of Independence, and it gave people something that was concrete to push against from both sides.
And what do you imagine America would have been like, and what do you imagine that the rest of Lincoln's presidency would have been like if he hadn't had been assassinated?
I think the tone of Reconstruction would have been different. He was a sensitive person who would have made sure that there was a framework of care for the returning soldiers on both sides. And that line with charity for all, compassion for all, or what's the
malice towards none,
malice towards none. That would have been his attitude towards the country.
Would have been the driving force.
And I think that the tone would have been a soothing tone. So I think that I'm not saying there wouldn't be problems today, but they might be less severe.
Really? You think that the relationship between blacks and whites would have been less severe?
I think so, because Andrew Johnson, who was his successor, was really a racist, and he was a Confederate.
Wow. That's really interesting to think about what America would have been like if these major things would not have happened. That's really, really fascinating. Now, let's go back to the 150th anniversary of so many things, but really the Lincoln's assassination, which is coming up here in a couple of weeks in April. Tell me what we should be looking for as we think about those dates, and as we, I don't want to say celebrate the 150th anniversary, but as we mark that occasion.
Well, I think we should think about a few things, and one is Lincoln's legacy today. And I'm actually participating in an event in a couple of weeks on April 10th at Lincoln's Cottage, a wonderful historic site in D.C. that's doing something called the Lincoln Ideas Forum. It's almost like a TED Talk event that's not going to focus on the past so much as on the present. How do Lincoln's ideas live on in everything from anti-trafficking, anti-human trafficking efforts around the world to ideas about immigration. People forget that Lincoln was a very strong proponent of immigration to America. And so I think he's one of those historical figures. You know, a great figure in history is almost like a great book. We can continue to look at it. It continues to teach us, to speak to every generation. And That's really how I'd like to look at Lincoln, rather than thinking so much about that moment that John Wilkes Booth stepped out with his
Right.
pistol in the theater.
Excellent. So 1861, your book, we can really dive deeply into that. And also you have the cover story in the National Geographic magazine. Tell me a little bit about that briefly.
That's right. Yeah, that's a story about Lincoln's legacy. And what I did was I followed the route of his funeral train that his train took to take his body from Washington back to
Great.
Illinois in 1865.
And people can find that on news shelves right now.
That's right. Newsstands right now.
Excellent. Thank you
Yeah.
so much, gentlemen, for bringing history alive and exciting us
Thank
about
you.
it.
Thanks for having us.
More Let's Talk Live's coming up. Stick with us right here.